Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Nick stormed through the grand entrance of the mansion, his jaw clenched and eyes blazing with a mix of fury and disbelief, Victoria trailing closely behind him, equally enraged, equally hurt. It was as if the air itself had thickened with the secrets that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. Secrets that Nikki, with her usual blend of grace and vulnerability, had somehow been forced to carry alone. Secrets that had finally come to light in a revelation so devastating that it sent shockwaves through the entire Newman family and threatened to upend the fragile balance of power, love, and loyalty that had been painstakingly maintained over decades, because what Nick and Victoria had discovered was not just a betrayal or a misstep. It was a meticulously orchestrated manipulation, a dark, sinister truth that linked Victor inextricably to a plan so cruel and calculating that it felt like a knife twisting in the heart of everyone who had ever trusted him. And as Victor turned to face them, the faintest trace of smugness on his face, a flash of arrogance that had always been his shield and his weapon, the room seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence, under the gravity of the revelation, because Nick's voice, usually measured, calm, and authoritative, now cracked with anger, fury spilling over in every syllable as he demanded answers, his hands trembling not from fear but from the intensity of emotions that surged through him like an unstoppable storm. And Victoria, standing beside him, her eyes glistening with tears that spoke of betrayal, heartbreak, and unfulfilled expectations, mirrored his intensity, her words slicing through the tension like a scalpel as she called Victor out, challenging every justification, every excuse he might dare to conjure in defense of his actions. And Nikki, caught between the maelstrom of accusations and her own conflicted feelings, felt the ground shift beneath her, the very foundations of her life rattling as she watched the two people she loved most confront the man who had shaped, controlled, and dominated their lives in ways both overt and subtle, ways that had often blurred the line between family loyalty and tyranny, between affection and manipulation. And as the confrontation escalated, the room seemed to vibrate with energy, the walls echoing with voices raised in anger, shock, and disbelief, as Nick accused Victor of scheming behind their backs, of exploiting every weakness, of betraying not just business interests but the very fabric of their family. And Victoria, her voice rising in tandem, laid bare the emotional toll of Victor's actions, the pain, the secrets kept from her, the lies that had eroded trust and intimacy over years, while Victor, ever the master of composure, tried to weave a narrative of control, of necessity, of tough love taken too far. But each word he uttered only served to fuel the flames of anger and disappointment, because the truth, once out, has a power all its own, a force that no amount of charm, justification, or intimidation can suppress. And as Nick stepped closer, fists clenched and eyes locked on Victor, the air between them practically crackling with tension, Nikki felt a surge of protective instinct, a desperate need to shield them all from the fallout that she had long feared. Yet she knew that some truths could not be hidden, some betrayals could not be undone, and the revelation that Victor had manipulated a situation involving their family, a dark secret that threatened to destroy everything they had built, was like a shadow falling over her heart, a shadow that no words of comfort could dispel. And as the confrontation reached its apex, the weight of generations of Newman family history pressed down on them, reminding each of them of the complex, often toxic bonds that had defined their lives, bonds that intertwined love and power, devotion and deception, loyalty and control. And in that moment, every glance, every gesture, every unspoken thought added fuel to the raging inferno of confrontation, leaving them all, Nick, Victoria, Victor, and Nikki, teetering on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether they would find reconciliation, revenge, or ruin, because in Genoa City, the line between justice and vengeance, between family and foe, between love and betrayal, is as fragile as it is treacherous, and as the echoes of their shouts, accusations, and demands for answers filled the cavernous halls of the Newman mansion, the truth sat there like a loaded gun, waiting, daring someone to pull the trigger. And in that tense, almost unbearable silence that followed, Nikki's eyes met Nick's, then Victoria's, her heart breaking even as it swelled with determination, knowing that the battle lines had been drawn, knowing that their lives, their relationships, and the very soul of their family would never be the same, and somewhere deep inside, a part of her knew that whatever happened next, whatever revelations, betrayals, or confessions, would define them all, not just as members of the Newman family, but as individuals fighting for identity, love, and truth in a world where secrets were the currency of survival, a world where Victor's power could bend wills but not hearts. And in that moment, as the storm of confrontation raged around her, Nikki realized that the fight was no longer just about business, or control, or pride. It was about protecting the essence of what family truly meant, and as Nick lunged forward, his voice a mix of rage and desperation, as Victoria's tears turned to fiery determination, and as Victor's composure began to crack under the weight of exposure, Nikki felt a strange mix of fear, hope, and resolve, knowing that the coming days would be filled with schemes, strategies, heartbreak, and perhaps even moments of unexpected unity, because in the twisted, dramatic, emotionally charged tapestry of the Newman family, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And the question of why Victor had attacked Nikki, why he had jeopardized her, their love, their trust, would linger in every whispered conversation, every hurried glance, every calculated move, echoing through the halls of Newman Enterprises and through the hearts of everyone involved, until the truth, in all its devastating clarity, finally claimed its place at the center of their lives, leaving no one untouched, no bond untested, and no secret unpunished, as the family braced for the fallout, for the next shocking revelation, for the emotional roller coaster that is life in Genoa City, knowing that in this world, love, loyalty, and betrayal are never simple, and that sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones that hurt the most, especially when they come from the people you trust the most. And as the echoes of their confrontation continued to reverberate through the marble halls of Newman Enterprises, a suffocating tension settled like a storm cloud over everyone present, thickening the air with unspoken fears and unshed tears, because every glance now carried the weight of history, every movement was laden with potential catastrophe, and Nikki, standing frozen for just a heartbeat, felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted permanently, leaving her unmoored in a sea of conflicting loyalties and emotions she had never anticipated, never wanted, but could no longer ignore, because the revelation that Victor had attacked her, or rather, had orchestrated events that had put her in danger, was more than a shock. It was a betrayal that cut to the core of her very being, a betrayal that forced her to question not just Victor's intentions, but her own judgment, her own capacity to understand the man she had loved, trusted, and forgiven for decades. And as Nick paced back and forth, fists clenched and teeth gritted, his mind racing through every possible scenario, replaying every interaction, every conversation, every smirk and glance that could now be seen in a new, sinister light, he realized that Victor's manipulations had been far more extensive, far more insidious than he had ever imagined, that the very foundations of their family, built over years of blood, sweat, and tears, were now trembling under the weight of secrets and lies too dangerous to ignore, while Victoria, whose heart had always been a compass of both empathy and fiery resolve, fought to maintain a sense of clarity amidst the chaos, struggling to separate the father she had loved and respected from the schemer whose actions had caused immeasurable pain, the man whose hands now seemed both familiar and frighteningly alien as she considered the extent of his betrayal. And in that moment, Nikki's voice, soft but tinged with tremors of anger and disbelief, pierced the charged silence, reminding them all that while Victor had wielded power, influence, and intimidation for decades, there was still a line he had crossed, one that even love and loyalty could not excuse. And as she spoke, her words seemed to hang in the air, tangible and accusatory, reaching Victor in a way that no argument, no rationalization, no manipulation could counter, because for the first time, The veil of fear and respect that had long shielded him from the full force of their anger was lifted, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and, for the first time in years, uncertain. And Nick, sensing the shift, felt a rush of protective fury for Nikki, his mother, his family, realizing that the man who had always seemed invincible, whose schemes had toppled businesses, relationships, and lives, was now on the defensive, scrambling to justify his actions, to maintain control in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond even his considerable grasp. And as the confrontation intensified, memories flooded Nick's mind, moments from his childhood, instances of Victor's domineering presence, the ways in which loyalty had always come with a price, the subtle and not-so-subtle forms of emotional manipulation that had shaped him, Victoria, and Nikki into the people they were today. And with each recollection, his anger grew, not just at Victor, but at the years of confusion, fear, and compromise they had all endured in the shadow of his authority, while Victoria's own reflections, intertwined with bitterness and sorrow, reminded her that her love for her father had always been complicated by the knowledge that his power could be wielded without conscience, that his ambition often superseded morality. And now, with the revelation of this dark secret, it was no longer theoretical, it was visceral, immediate, and undeniably dangerous. And as Victor opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to explain, perhaps to manipulate, perhaps to defend himself with his trademark charisma and eloquence, the words faltered, caught in the storm of accusations, disbelief, and rage that surrounded him, leaving him momentarily exposed. A rarity in a man who had so often concealed vulnerability behind control, intimidation, and calculated charm. And Nikki, sensing the rare crack in his armor, felt both relief and anxiety, because while it was validating to see him unsettled, it also reminded her that the consequences of exposure were unpredictable, potentially catastrophic, and would demand more from them all than anyone could yet anticipate. And as Nick and Victoria advanced, both physically and emotionally, pressing their questions, their accusations, their anger, Victor's gaze flickered to Nikki, a silent plea, a subtle calculation, and a glimmer of regret. Or was it strategy? And in that split second, the air seemed to hum with possibility, danger, and revelation, because the truth, once partially revealed, has a momentum all its own, unstoppable and consuming, demanding attention, demanding resolution. And as Nikki's heart raced, as Nick's temper flared, and as Victoria's voice rose, slicing through the tension like a sharpened blade, the full weight of what had been uncovered began to press down on them, pressing on their hearts, minds, and souls, threatening to fracture the very bonds they had always thought unbreakable. And in the midst of this, the walls of the mansion seemed to close in, amplifying every word, every gesture, every unspoken emotion, until the confrontation became almost unbearable, a physical force in its own right, because in Genoa City, in the Newman household, the collision of love, loyalty, betrayal, and revelation was never just emotional, it was visceral, felt in every pulse, every breath, every racing heartbeat. And as Victor, cornered yet unyielding, attempted to weave a defense, the sheer audacity of his past machinations began to unravel under the relentless scrutiny of Nick and Victoria's combined fury, exposing threads of manipulation, hidden agendas, and secret deals that had always been just out of reach. And now, with Nikki standing witness to the unfolding storm, the question of why Victor had attacked her, or rather, why he had jeopardized her life, her safety, and her trust, loomed over them like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating, leaving them all to grapple with a reality that was more treacherous and complicated than any of them could have imagined. And as the confrontation reached new heights, tempers flared, accusations flew, tears were shed, and in that whirlwind of emotion, the family realized that the coming days would demand not just courage, not just resilience, but a recalibration of everything they believed about each other, about loyalty, about love, about the fine line between protecting and controlling. And as the storm subsided slightly, leaving only the echo of raw emotion, the unspoken fear, and the lingering question of how far Victor's ambitions would go, Nikki, with a mixture of dread and determination, stepped forward, her voice both trembling and resolute, declaring that no matter what came next, they would face it together, or at least, those of them willing to confront the truth. And as Nick and Victoria absorbed the weight of her words, their anger slowly tempered by the realization that unity might be their only defense against the consequences of Victor's actions. The mansion itself seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging that a chapter of reckoning had begun, one that would test every bond, every allegiance, every secret, and every heart in ways they could never have foreseen. And as the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows, the Newman family stood at a precipice, staring into a future fraught with uncertainty, peril, and perhaps, in rare and fleeting moments, hope, because in a world where power, love, and betrayal are intertwined so tightly, the path forward is never straightforward, never safe, and never devoid of shocking revelations. And as they each retreated to process the confrontation, to strategize, to grieve, and to brace for the next wave of chaos, the mansion held its breath, waiting because in Genoa City, the next bombshell was always just around the corner, ready to explode, and the question of why Victor had attacked Nikki would continue to haunt every decision, every conversation, every heartbeat, shaping their lives in ways both devastating and irrevocable, leaving no one untouched, no relationship untested, and no secret unpunished. Because when the Newman family is involved, the drama never ends, the stakes are never small, and the truth, when it finally surfaces, has the power to shatter everything, yet also, perhaps, to redeem, to unite, to redefine what it means to be family in a world ruled by ambition, betrayal, and love, a world where every shadow hides a story. Every glance conceals an agenda, and every whispered word can trigger a chain reaction that changes lives forever. And as Nick, Victoria, and Nikki contemplated the revelations of the evening, each silently bracing for the battles ahead, the weight of what had transpired lingered. A reminder that in the Newman household, even love is a battlefield, even loyalty is tested, and even the strongest hearts are vulnerable when confronted with the darkest secrets. And just as the emotional dust seemed to settle, a new, almost imperceptible tension began to weave itself through the room, a subtle but undeniable reminder that Victor, even when cornered, was never fully defeated, because the man had built his life, his power, and his legacy on the ability to anticipate every move, to manipulate every perception, and to turn even the fiercest accusations into opportunities for control. And as Nikki stood silently, heart pounding, a mixture of fear, anger, and something closer to sorrow twisting in her chest, she realized that the real danger was not just in what Victor had done, but in what he might still do, in the unseen strands of influence, leverage, and cunning that he held like cards close to his chest. And Nick, pacing like a coiled spring, clenched his jaw as he imagined every potential scheme Victor could enact in retaliation, every plan to regain dominance, to assert that no Newman, no matter how close, could ever truly escape his orbit, while Victoria, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady her breathing, contemplated the moral and emotional calculus of confronting a father who had wielded his love and authority like a weapon. And in that moment, Nikki's mind flashed back to countless moments of vulnerability, of loyalty, of blind trust that had been tested, bent, and sometimes broken. And she felt a pang of realization that the confrontation tonight was not just a battle of words or accusations, but a turning point in the life of every Newman present, a pivotal moment where their choices, their courage, and their willingness to stand against Victor, or, conversely, to be ensnared once again by his manipulations, would define the trajectory of their family for years to come. And as the three of them exchanged silent glances, communicating without words the mix of determination and uncertainty that charged the room, the mansion seemed almost alive, its walls echoing with decades of secrets, betrayals, triumphs, and heartbreaks, as though every shadow and every corridor bore witness to the storm raging in that central room. And Victor, Sensing the shift in energy, the momentary hesitation that came from fear, anger, and disbelief allowed a small, almost imperceptible smirk to cross his face. Reminder that while he could be exposed, he was never entirely defeated, and that the game, as it always had been, was far from over. And Nikki, catching that fleeting expression, felt both dread and clarity, understanding in that instant that the true